Well, let's go back to the Rochester area at first. This is one thing that I often will start off by asking, creative people, I think in a lot of ways, our sort of early years really inform our tastes, what we end up pursuing, and sort of our influences. So when you
Yeah.
were a kid growing up in the Rochester area, what was did your home environment sort of cultivate your artistic side? And what were some of those like early influences that can you remember that sort of sparked your creative passion?
Yeah, there were many, but both of my parents met in art school, so they were artists, and to a certain extent still are. My siblings are all artists, and I have two cousins who are illustrators, and my uncle was an illustrator and painter. So the Bliss family was really involved in the art scene in Rochester. And so I always joke that you know, I had done my first drawing in utero, little drawing, Connie Crayon drawing, but that's not really true. But the Rochester Art Museum was the Memorial Art Gallery of Rochester had a massive influence on me. And every time I go back to Rochester, I check out that museum. I've been all over the world, and it's a smallish museum, but it's really it's pretty sublime. I love that collection. But
One
yeah, comics and my family and was very influential growing up.
What kind of comics for you really kind of sparked your interest? Because they're all the rage now, or at least the comic book heroes are and the movies are. But I
Yeah.
suspect when you were growing up, it was much more of the counterculture thing, which is kind of how they started originally. So what comic books and what comic book artists inspired you?
Yeah, I didn't get into counterculture comics until, in my 30s. I was really a kind of I collected the worst comics, like the comics that aren't worth anything today. They're still great, but I collected like Marvel, Werewolf by Night and Tomb of Dracula, and of course Mad magazine I loved. Mad had a very big influence on me as well. But yeah, I mean, we would go up to the Dome Arena. I don't even know if it's still there in Henrietta. And the Dome would have, they would have like a flea market on Sundays. And there was this guy, Mark, and they're all smoking cigarettes and their boxes of comics. And me and my brother Charlie would go up there and peruse all the books and look for some deals. So there's, yeah, big impact. Plus there was 7-Eleven up by James E. Sperry High School. They had the Marvel superhero Slurpee cups, and I would religiously go and get those. It was like heaven, man. On my banana seat bicycle.
For you, what is different about doing these sort of comic book panels that you're known for, that you've done so many for so many great publications? What's different about them, and what's challenging and rewarding about them for you?
For me, comic cartoon gag panels, for me personally, it's more about a narrative mirth. So it's more about dropping into something. I've said this before, but in most cases, when I draw a panel, I want the reader to feel as though that they're dropping into some narrative that has already been taking place. And that narrative continues beyond the panel. And we're just dropping in on that. It happened prior to the panel. And if I think of these drawings, whether it's two people out to dinner or a man talking to his dog, I have to then imagine the narrative, and then that informs a caption. Now, within that caption, there has to be some social universal commentary on the human condition. Maybe it appeals to dog owners. Maybe it appeals to, I don't know, social workers, you name it. But so that's different in sequential comics and graphic novels, because graphic novels, of course, is a long narrative, and you have many, many panels in which to tell a story over a period of time. And you also have the space between the panels, which people don't really talk about. That white space that happens, that's where your imagination lies. We give you this panel and this panel, but that white space, things happen in that place. And that's a very important distinction between single panel gag cartoons and sequential comics.
I grew up in a household where we watched a lot of classic SNL, and I'm quite a bluegrass fan myself. So
Nice.
I've been itching to ask this question. How on earth did you meet Steve Martin? How did this whole thing happen?
Well, it happened because my editor at the New Yorker, Francois Mouly, who I've worked with for many years, 20 years now, was having dinner with Steve and his wife, Anne. Anne used to work at the New Yorker as a fact checker and an editor and a writer. And Steve had some cartoon gag ideas that he and his wife had one too, in particular, that made it in the book. And he was curious about. He said, "You know someone who I could work with?" And Francoise mentioned. She said, "Yeah, Harry Bliss." And he turns out he really is a fan of my work, which is very flattering. So shortly thereafter, Francoise connected us via email, and we were off and running, man. I mean, it just, a lot of the stuff that is in the book, some of those sequential narratives, those comic strips that are kind of peppered throughout the book, explain fairly faithfully how the relationship developed. I mean, some of it is humorous, and we make things up just for fun, but Steve will email me every day. I mean, if there's 2 or 3 days that go by, it's pretty rare that we're not in touch with each other. And we're working on a second book now too, which is pretty cool.
So when did you first really connect with him, and then how long did it take to get the book going? Like to get it from kind of like, because you had the ideas, when did you connect with him, and then how long did it take for the book to come out?
Well, we were doing initially, we were just doing syndicate cartoons. So he just was doing it for fun. All along, we just wanted to, if it wasn't fun, we weren't going to do it. It was one of those things where, I wasn't sure, because I love Steve Martin and I grew up with his humor, and he's brilliant. I mean, he's morphed. He's a brilliant mind. So that didn't necessarily mean to me that he would have what it takes to write cartoons. It's a specific type of humor. But as it turned out, he was pretty good, and he was very persistent, which I really admired, kind of his tenacity in all this. And he would, and of course, if Steve Martin's humor, some of the cartoons that he would suggest or write up for me to draw were very unique, and they were the type of cartoons, and again, many of them are in the book, that I would have never thought of. So that type of collaboration appeals to me very much. And the fact I had to remove the fact that it was Steve Martin, because sometimes I'd read a caption and I'd read it in Steve's voice, and I'm like, oh, that's really funny. And then I'd have to say, wait a minute, is it funny because you're reading it in Steve Martin's voice, or is it a funny cartoon? So that was a tiny kind of a hurdle I had to navigate through.
Well, I was going to say, you said something earlier, and it was an interesting phrase, and I was sort of thinking about it, which was narrative mirth, and that's something that he does very well. So it seems like, in that sense, you two kind of like had this connection there already, which probably explains why he was a fan of your work, because you two sort of had the same mindset.
I think you're right. I think that's true. I mean, I agree with you. I didn't realize at the time, but I realized it. 6 months into it, I'm like, Steve, there is a simpatico here. There's something we share in this. So it's interesting. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the book. It's called The Wealth of Pigeons. What exactly is it? You talked a little bit about the narrative structures in between, but look at that.
A Wealth of Pigeons.
Well,
it was really fun. And Steve talks about, working on the project and then having the book. It's interesting because we worked over a year on this, and back and forth. There was over 300. We had to weed out some cartoons, but there's, for all you.
I love this. That's duck hunting. That's amazing.
Yeah, and there's some in here. Can I show you one that's really Steve? That Absolutely. This is that just. Like, I would have never thought of this cartoon. This is one that I really like, but it's hard. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a parade scene, and there's a speaker here, and the speaker is telling the crowd, please stand back. Due to the high number of entrants, Today's parade will move at 75 miles an hour. So it's just a cartoon I would never have thought of. And this was one of the first ones that he sent to me, which was I have no thumbs. But now I'll show you one more thing. And the other thing about the book that was really fun was the fact that we had the opportunity to kind of make up these comic strips that appear throughout the book. And this is one where, we're out in the woods of New Hampshire, and he takes out his banjo and scares the hell out of all of the wildlife. But I'm sorry, I forgot your initial question for the book. But
I think in demonstrating, you answered it perfectly. It's one thing you said, which I think is sort of an interesting topic, because I've had my own weird brush with fame. I did a story, hard to believe it was 6 months ago now, where like two guys were like a black guy and a white guy are having beers outside of their house. And I do a story on it, and it blows up to the point where like Brad Paisley surprises them at a party. And like, then they were in his music video. I was in his music video. And I don't say this to brag, because it's not that, but it's a weird thing, because I've interviewed him, and it's this weird thing where you're like, you kind of have to shut it off. And so you have to like shut off the fact that like, oh, this isn't like Steve Martin, or else you wouldn't get anything done. But in that process, I think you can really learn a lot about people. And you talked about some of the traits that you thought were, that you might have surprised about, or he's a better comic writer than you would have thought. But what's something that has sort of surprised you, or learned, or you've gained a better appreciation for now that you've worked with like Steve Martin the person a little bit more, not seeing Steve Martin the character?
Well, first off, he's just a nice person. I mean, that's the big takeaway for me is I really like him as a human being. He's just kind. I also learned that the things that I've learned about Steve is that he's super generous. He can be very modest, and he's a hell of an art collector, he has a fantastic art collection. So we're able to talk about art in a pretty in-depth way. And he has certain visual instincts into my cartoons. Like he'll mention Winslow Homer, or he'll say, this particular drawing reminds him of some obscure German landscape painter. And that's very rare. And so we have a connection on that. But I would say overall, I've learned that it's interesting, because people, think of Steve, and they think of Steve Martin's SNL and The Jerk and, his movies, but he's actually a great writer. I mean, people don't realize what a terrific writer he is. I just read 4 of his plays, and a book of his plays. They're just great. I mean, and I didn't know. I mean, I grew up on all that's the 70s stuff, and he's been on the Tonight Show like 77 times. It's like, so, but like I said, the first and most important thing for me is that he's just a nice guy. He's a great collaborator. He's great to work with, very modest.
Absolutely. One thing I do sort of, like to ask in this situation is the book, it came out. I know that's a very good feeling. It's something you've worked hard on. It's out in the universe. Not exactly a spoilers thing, but if someone, if you want to say to someone like, hey, before you read this, this is something that I would want you to take away from it. What would that something be? Or what was sort of a goal besides just like the collaborative process that we've talked about a lot? What was sort of an artistic goal, if there was one, in putting out this collection?
There actually, toward the end, it was a respite. It was a respite from 2020. We really wanted, a lot of my humor that most of it ends up on Instagram, and some of the stuff in the New Yorker is pretty sardonic and can get pretty dark. And we wanted this book to steer a little bit away from that, because we felt like we wanted the book to be a family book. We wanted it to appeal to, there are cartoons in the book that appeal to 10-year-olds, you know, that are just silly and funny. Yeah, I mean, we wanted it to be a book that gets passed around from husband to wife to sister to brother to, you know, the whole family. That's really it.
Love it.
And hopefully they laugh.
All right, I've got one little section for you. Anytime I interview a creative person who's done cool things, I ask them like 3 big picture questions. I call it the lightning round. There's no reason. Take your time.
All right.
First one, you know, we talked a little bit about sort of growing up in Rochester and moving around, but what's something about Rochester, your hometown, that made it such a great place for you and other artists who do original art to thrive?
Well, you know, for me, it was the art scene is pretty strong, and the music scene's great there too. But for me, it was the Henrietta Public Library, and it was the Memorial Art Gallery of Rochester, man. Any school library, my you know, McQuaid Jesuit, I spent a year there, and but yeah, the Memorial Art Gallery was huge for me.
Love it. Next one, if you could accomplish one thing and have that be like your crowning achievement, you've already done so much in terms of, you know, this book, doing things for the New Yorker, being published in all these places, but if you could do like one thing that you would consider the big achievement, what would it be?
Wow. Well, one thing, I think I just want to make it to, I want to be an old man, and I want to be as empathetic as I possibly can. I want to keep drawing and making art, and I have this fellowship program that I started in Cornish, New Hampshire. I started that in 2016 in conjunction with the Center for Cartoon Studies. So each year we give an award to a graphic novelist, and they apply from all over the country. So that's something I'm really proud of. I want to continue that. I want to continue to use any success that I have to empower and you know, financially reward the best up and coming graphic storytellers out there, and maybe have a museum someday of comic art. That would be nice.
That'd be pretty cool. By the way, I think empathy is always a good goal that all of us should go towards, especially in a very cynical age.
Yeah.
Finally, one more. If you have any advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
Well, the one thing you have to do, and Neil Gaiman said this, is you kind of have to live a life. I mean, you have to experience things, and you have to move about. You have to have your heart broken. You have to get in trouble, and then you have to draw from life. Now, I met Andrew Wyeth once. I spent 2 hours with him, and I talked to him, and we both kind of had this. We both agree that drawing is essential. It's a way for artists to understand the world they live in. And it you don't necessarily have to draw in the end. You could work on a computer, but I think this hand thing, this brain to hand onto paper thing, and then looking and taking it in and taking it through you, it's a spiritual journey, man. And I really think honestly, it's not something just artists should do. Everybody should do it. And I really believe it. It's a meditation. And I can't say that strongly enough. If you want to be an artist, actually, if you want to be a good artist, you should be drawing every single day, every day.
Awesome. Harry, thank you so much for your time, brother. I really appreciate it. So since